Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for a really exciting topic, our partnership with Scale Computing and talking about business resiliency, right? So evolving from disaster recovery, evolving from hyperconverged. We had this lovely thing in a pandemic, right, that taught us that disaster recovery, disasters mean different things, right? We used to define them as just when water happens or fire happens or something like that, but it's actually much more than that, and that's what we're learning. And so we're going to talk today about how specifically scale computing and Elevity have worked together to solve for that problem. So my name is Paul Hager. I'm the Director of Solutions here at Elevity. Jared's having some technical difficulties with our Teams platform, so it's just going to be me today, I think. But that's all right. We're going to get through and have a great discussion. I would love to hear your questions about hyperconverged and private cloud and business resilience. And we want to start off with just a case study, an example, and a story of where scale computing and Elevity together was successful for an organization. So Goodwill of North Central Wisconsin, obviously a non-for-profit organization. They had less IT staff and they had a complex infrastructure, often what's called three-tier infrastructure. They had servers and storage and switching, all from different vendors, backup from another vendor, backup storage from another vendor. And with scale computing as the solution with Elevity's deployment and provisioning services, as well as our pre-sales architectural planning, we could get them to a single platform. So one vendor, no surprise expenses as a nonprofit, having to manage that. Our hardware for renewal up on our servers is in February, and our backup vendors renewal is in April, and all these different expenses that seem to have different terms and different time periods and different expenses is really hard for any organization to manage, but in particular for a non-for-profit organization that's trying to manage that cost to make sure their dollars are going back to their mission and not being eaten by their back office or their IT infrastructure, right? So this is really where these solutions offered by Elevity and Scale Computing can come together and have success. And now with one of the exciting new announcements that Scale has made in their partnership with Acronis, we're going to talk about even that backup portion. So we're going to talk about how you can have a production cluster that's running your primary compute and servers. That can be having snapshots done to maybe a single DR node or multiple DR nodes or servers. And then you can have a backup device that can even instantiate or run workloads on it as well. And all that be within the scale computing framework. And then leveraging their new partnership with Acronis to do the imaging and backups and to give backup retention and continue that story, maybe even go out to Acronis's cloud, maybe even be a fully managed backup solution with a managed service provider like Elevity, providing that complete story. And Goodwill made their first step getting off of this three-tier infrastructure and moved to a hyperconverged platform, and now they've made the other step in completing that story with that new BRS node that we're going to talk a little bit more about here a little bit later. Elevity and scale computing have a great history. We go back a number of years, which in the technology space when things are evolving, we are a part of their partner advisory council. We're their top tier of their partners, called a platinum tier partner. Had many conversations with their executive level team and have a voice into what's going on within this organization. They're based out of Indianapolis. Elevity has an office in Indianapolis. We have good overlap and just a fantastic organization. Our growth within Scale has been double digit, at times triple digit year over year. We're install certified. We have managed service options to deliver Scale, either sell Scale to you, help you set it up, and depending on your size of your organization, if you have internal IT, hand that off to you. We can also deliver it as a fully managed offering or as hardware as a service and wrap our management and managed services around it if you don't have IT or if you just don't want to be in the business of managing data center infrastructure. We have great pre-sales expertise. Our pre-sales teams are all certified in scale computing. They have years of experience looking at whatever your environment or your business challenge may be. And then Elevity being a Gordon Flesch company, Gordon Flesch wholly owns its own leasing entity, and we've been able to be creative with organizations around how they finance their IT purchases and assets, and whether that's an asset that they want to own or something they want to lease or something they want to rent. And so we have all the different flexibility, which is why I think the Elevity and Scale partnership has been so successful over the years. It's just we really line up well, and at Elevity, we really haven't deployed SANs or the old three-tier storage area networks in many years. We've really leaned into if you're going to do private cloud and manage your own data center, it should probably be in a software-defined data center like scale computing. So I start at the top. What are we here to talk about and what are we doing? We're talking about business resiliency and what does that mean, right? Business resilience is a combination of proactive and reactive planning for an organization to mitigate and adapt quickly and effectively to threats that affect their operation and success of the organization, right? So this, as I talked about at the beginning, right, we thought about disasters as, point in time events. But really it's more than that, right? It's more than just Sally Sue deletes a file and we need to have backup. That's part of it. But now it's more than water started coming down the walls in our data center room, happened to be below in a multi-tier building, somebody's bathroom upstairs that we've seen that. But now it's things like being prepared for cybersecurity events, which are much more likely than I think some of the other things we've talked about. We have an active war going on overseas. Which means that there is a heightened amount of cybersecurity events that are going on in the world in general. We talked about this global neighborhood, and it just continues to get more and more challenging. But it's not just having the infrastructure, it's how do people then access it, right? How would they access it if they're all remote? What if you can't come into the office where all of your infrastructure is? And so really planning for, and the pandemic taught us that business resiliency is a lot more than can we get data back? Can we get the file back to some new piece of hardware? But really, we need to include, intelligent cloud and maybe even intelligent edge computing as well, right? So how have organizations responded to the pandemic, right? They reacted to it, they had to reinvent it, and they had to build towards greater resiliency, right? So step one was just being ready and having the infrastructure ready to be reactive. We saw people in a reactive mode just buy a bunch of laptops, buy a bunch of hardware, and then they all got home and people started setting up VPNs, right? The number of requests I remember Elevity getting for just VPN setup. Cisco offered their VPN client for free during the pandemic for a while, and Cisco never offers things for free, right? That was just, we knew we sent people home. Oftentimes we just said, pick up whatever the device is that's on your desk and run home with it. And now we extended our company network into these less secure locations, and will we ever get all those devices back, right? Not only from just like a loss perspective, but how do we start to unwind? How do we reinvent? How do we rebuild for what should have happened? What should we have been resilient with and ready? And that would be more like having virtual desktops or VDI. VDI stands for virtual desktop infrastructure. So being able to send people home with whatever device, but no VPN is necessary because we're going to have them securely tunnel in through a portal and get to a virtual desktop that is on the same infrastructure or right next to the infrastructure back at the office or sitting in public cloud or sitting in a hosted private cloud, right? It's important when we think about these things and we think about extending the network that we're more resilient when we aren't extending the network into people's homes, right? Where, kids are plugging in all of their devices and we just don't know what is. It's also something that we can test out, right? We can have people work remotely for a few days, or, we're here in the Midwest, so we have snow days, right? Where it's not safe to try to drive into work. And so these are opportunities to test your business resiliency and make sure that people are able to work, right? And then we hope to move to that operational innovation, right? Going beyond reactive, going beyond having things like virtual desktops and really well-tuned hosted private clouds back at our office, but really thinking about being resilient to all the types of threats that are out there. What would we do in the event of ransomware? How do we get people working? What if a building was down for a long period from a power or not accessible? And really start to drive more operational opportunities within each of those, right? So business resiliency is really about this move away and into high availability. Not within the office, right? If we lose a hard drive, if we lose a server, making sure that we minimize downtime, that we have disaster recovery capabilities, that we have a DR server that we can get to, but also what I just talked about, right? Working from anywhere, being able to connect remote users securely to that existing infrastructure. Certainly, all of this is wrapped in a context of cybersecurity and making sure that we're actively protecting our networks from attacks and that we can quickly recover. If you have quick recovery capabilities, you won't ever pay a ransom because you always have access to a copy of your data that's good. And then there's backup, right? So disaster recovery is, can I get back up and running? Backup is, do I just have separated copies or air gap copies of my data somewhere that the bad guys, if they got in the environment, couldn't attack? And one of the things that we consistently have seen, we work with a lot of different technologies, but one of the great things about our partnership with Scale Computing is the bad guys don't seem to know what to do or how to attack that HC3 layer. Their operating system, their hypervisor, continues to be resilient to cyber attacks, which means when we have had attack events occur at customers of ours that have Scale Computing, we've been able to quickly get to recovery points and restore from snapshots. And those snapshots have been healthy and unattacked from the bad guys. And I think that's just a testament to Scale Computing's architecture and the work that they've done. And we certainly see a need for scalability when it comes to business resilience, right? What if we need to send 100 more people at home? What if we send 50 people home, but then our business grows because the pandemic had a positive effect on our business and we needed to staff up and we can't staff them at our office. So we got to send people devices at home. Well, what if we could, instead of sending them a really expensive device, send them a thin client and give them connectivity back to the office? And how do we scale up for that, right? Well, with a hyperconverged platform, you can easily scale out by just adding another node. It rebalances all of the workloads versus a traditional way of adding drives, adding another server, this very we need to buy everything we would ever consume for 5 years kind of mentality. We need to spend all of our budget and then hope that we can make it 3 years with this investment or hope that we can make it 5 years. Really, hyperconverged gives the opportunity to be more cloud-like and buy what you need when you need it and scale out as you need to. And that sometimes takes just some reframing. We're so used to, when we're doing architecture sessions, saying, well, let's plan for lots of growth and lots of capacity. And we can still do that if you want. But really, with hyperconverged, with the ability to just very easily do it, and we've actually, we've been with Scale long enough that not only have we brought people into the Scale Computing HC3 platform, but we've been through multiple generations of their life within HC3. So now it's 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and it's just normal hardware life cycle, right? This stuff still ultimately runs on hardware that has mean times before failure. And we want to just get the latest access to the latest flash for speed and performance, the latest RAM, the latest processors to make our databases and systems run faster. That migration isn't this big lift and shift. It's not our team coming out for hundreds of hours to refactor your whole environment. Instead, we rack the new Scale nodes next to the older ones and just tell it to move the workloads, all while people are still working. You can do it in the middle of the day. It heals itself in this self-healing platform onto the new hardware, and then we exit the old nodes, right? So gone are the days where it's this big downtime window to be able to manage it. And that just goes to the scalability and portability of this, right? So a few misconceptions that we need to head off right away is, a few of you might be saying, I already have DR. I've got a disaster recovery plan in place. But having a plan and have you test it, and they can come in many forms, right? So it's hard to be prepared for every scenario, but there are some building blocks here that are good, right? Resiliency at the core of your environment, being able to handle failures gracefully in an automated way, and then knowing how you're going to get people remote access to those systems, make sure people have those right devices in place. We even have some customers that have agreements with companies that will drop off a bus at their location and provide internet and thin client workstations so that they have a contract to know that there will be a plan in place for their people, right? There's some folks that are saying this all sounds great, but I don't have the budget or the time to manage for or think about all this. And we hear you, but the less we're prepared for this, the less you're invested and ready for an event like this, I think just it increases the odds that you're not going to be able to recover successfully, and that may even mean that your business ultimately suffers to the degree that it's not be able to stay functional, and that's not a good. If you're in the IT space in this call, it's not good to the answer to be, well, we just didn't have time to get around to really thinking through that whole plan, right? The other thing you might be saying is my employees can work remotely on laptops with a VPN, and it's true. But trying to manage that, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, it starts to get really challenging to be able to do that. And a traditional VPN connects your device at home and makes it impersonate like it's on the network back at the office. And there's a few challenges with that from a security standpoint. You're really pulling your corporate environment into people's homes in a lot of ways. And we are seeing examples of home networks bring in risk. But there's also a number of business applications that just don't do well over VPN as a technology, right? So think of even a simple example like QuickBooks is a client server application that expects that the client is on the same network, not just virtually, but physically the same network. You can get that with a virtual desktop because the virtual desktop sits back at the office right next to or on the same infrastructure as your server, and we're just sending the screen data to your home via virtual desktop. So it's a more successful deployment, and we certainly saw a little bit of that too. Everyone went home, everyone connected with VPNs and a laptop, and then latency, this time it takes the speed of light to get data to and from, made those applications ran so poorly or even had data corruption that it became a problem. So what do we see organizations choosing? We've talked about this a lot, right? Hyperconverged infrastructure, this highly available, self-healing, scalable infrastructure that's really simple to deploy and manage. Virtual desktops for a more secure, more flexible way to manage it. Ransomware protection, make sure that we are able to monitor or prevent attacks that may cripple IT systems and prevent them from happening. But if it does, make sure we have good backup in DR, leveraging the cloud, leveraging something that's got what they call an air gap. There's got to be something, if the bad guys get in and they do a scan, they don't see your backup drives just sitting there with the same passwords as your network, that they can compromise, delete the backups, and you're in a bad spot, because that is the first thing attackers do, right? That dwell time, that time in the network is 270 to 315 days. And when they are in that dwell period, learning about your environment, one of the big things that they're doing in there is making sure that they discover your backup and DR procedures and try to circumvent those before they start their main attack. So a little bit about our partner here, Scale Computing, right? They're founded in 2008. They launched the HC3 platform in 2012. They have a very unique approach to technology that allows them to scale down in a way that no other competitor can. I get a chance to run our emerging solutions committee here at Elevity, and we continue to select Scale as one of our top solution providers because they continue to innovate. They're laser focused. All of their R&D is focused on this platform and improving HC3, and they're very open to feedback. They hear from their customers and from their partners, make sure they're developing the technology in a really meaningful way. They have thousands of customers, global customers in SMB, in mid-market, distributed enterprise. And we'll talk a little bit later too about how highly rated and highly reviewed they are. And if you go to any of your peers, just kind of peer forums or CRN type avenues, or Gartner, and look in their Magic Quadrant, you're going to continue to find Scale Computing. So whether it's the industry analysts like Gartner and IDC, or it's the actual IT managers, feet on the street that are interacting with the technology at Tech Validate and Trust Radius and Spiceworks, what you're hearing consistently is people love Scale Computing once they get their hands on it and see how easy it is to manage. And if it's your job to manage it, we're talking about getting hours of your day back. And if you outsource that, it lets us be more effective in our ability to manage and provide that service to you and maintain your productivity, which is ultimately what you're after, right? Maybe today I keep saying HCI and hyperconverged, like everyone on the call knows exactly what it is. So just the quick definition of it, right? Hyperconverged infrastructure is the integration of compute, storage, and virtualization into a single solution architecture, right? So the servers, the storage, and the hypervisor. So the old way we did this, right, and everything is cyclical in IT. So we used to have mainframes and dumb terminals. And then we invented the server and the modern individual PC. And so people had personal computers on their desks. And then if you had a domain controller, that was a server. If you had a file server, that was a server. If you have a database, that was a server. And so we had racks and racks of physical servers. And then we kind of invented the first iteration of private cloud, which was we said, all right, let's take all those hard drives out of those servers. Let's put them in a SAN, a storage area network, a box. And that's where all the virtual machines will live. And we'll make that as redundant as we can, this big expensive box. And then we'll connect multiple servers to it so that if a server fails, the next server can jump in line because the data lives still there. But you can see on the left here all of the complexity of that, right? The disks are down at the bottom. The storage area network has to go across a storage network across its network cards. All of those are different vendors. All of those have different firmware. Then they have to go talk to the network cards of the individual servers themselves. And those have different firmware. Those have different manufacturers. And we got to manage the virtual machines all on top of that. So you can see where your actual workload runs ends up way at the top of that list, really far away from where it is. And then we got into the answer of, well, what happens if that SAN down at the bottom stops working correctly? Well, the answer is everything goes down, which isn't the answer people wanted. So it was really complex, really expensive. And so we kind of entered this new era of what if computing in your data center or your data closet, was like computing in the cloud, right? You managed it all on the web, didn't have proprietary software or management servers. If you need to update things, it would be able to be a one-click update, and it would do firmware and the software. It would self-heal, meaning it would recognize that a hard drive has failed or even a whole server has failed. It would readjust and make sure the virtual machines are able to stay running. You'd be able to deploy it quickly, and you'd be able to replicate and create replicas very easily. And again, this scale out, like we need more capacity, I need more compute, so you can add a more compute heavy node, or I need more storage, so we can add more storage heavy nodes, and seamlessly scale out based on where the business is going. And you can buy what you need when you need it. You don't have to overbuy on day one. Scale definitely has some competitors, right? They have other folks, VMware, for example, has been in the virtualization space for a long time, and they created their own virtual SAN, which is what you kind of see here on the left. And so what they have to do is they actually have to run a virtual machine just to run your other virtual machines. So you need to run this virtual appliance alongside all your other ones. So you need to account for that. You have to buy additional RAM and CPU just to support the virtual machine to run your virtual machines. So you're really losing a number of the benefits that going converged really provides. And this has always been HC3's very unique value proposition. And it's part of the reason why they can get so small that a scale computing node can get down to a single individual Intel NUC. A 6-inch by 6-inch model is how lean they can get. I'll show you their model line up here in a moment. But they consume less than 12 gigs of RAM, a fraction of a core, and it's embedded. When you turn on your scale node, all that hypervisor, all that converged infrastructure comes up right with it. So you don't need to wait for the infrastructure to turn on, then your virtual machine that runs the virtual machines to turn on, and then your virtual machines can turn on. That complexity has challenges. It introduces performance challenges at times. And it also ultimately is more things that can kind of go wrong, and means that those nodes from the competitors to scale computing can never get smaller than a certain amount, because so much RAM and so much processing power gets kind of sucked away from what you're buying to run your business. So again, it's simple to use, deploys typically a node in under an hour. We make sure that the storage is right. It can be all flash. It can be NVMe, the fastest stuff that's out there. It can be spinning disks, that's slower, and it can be a hybrid of those. And you can choose what virtual machines get more performance than the next. We talked about it self-heals. If things fail, it reacts to that all on its own. You can scale from single nodes up to multiple nodes, and you can mix and match types. And because you're not paying for other people's technology being embedded in it because they wrote it from the ground up, you're not paying for additional licensing, and you get that complete stack. Like we talked about the success we had in our non-for-profits. We see this it's successful in commercial businesses we've sold this to. We've had a lot of success in state and local government and in education and in nonprofits. Because the name of the game there is simplicity, because staff is typically tight, hard to get additional headcount. So that headcount is having to manage more, oftentimes, sometimes for less dollars. And so even if there might be a product that's got 100 bells and whistles and HC3 only has 75, this is just substantially easier to manage and more affordable. So I talked about that that whole lineup, right? So all the way on the left, you see you can go from a single Intel NUC with a single network port and some flash installed in it to the very typical, 1U node to stacks of 1U clusters. We can still do some tower form factors for backup devices or for, maybe point of sale servers at the store level. And then kind of the mainstays, the HC 1000 and 3000 and 5000 lines where we can get, really dense, can have a lot of storage. And again, all that redundancy is all handled, right? You don't need to worry about what RAID level are you or what should the storage configuration be. It manages all of that. And then you can extend that up into the cloud, whether you're using this new Acronis partnership from a DR perspective or HC3 Cloud Unity running on Google GCP. Gives you an option to run workloads, you have a disaster recovery option without having to invest in another physical location. If you have another location or you have co-location, then one of the really great advantages of scale computing is you could have a very typical 3 physical server cluster at your primary location and one larger node at one of your other locations. Just leverage, a closet that you have at one of your other sites, and that can become your disaster recovery site. Instead of having to, build this huge data center out, right? We're just talking about a single node that can often run 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 100 virtual machines on a single node, and continue to scale that out. So we just see a ton of flexibility, and our team at Elevity helps you design and pick which of these is kind of right for your business. So we can complete that whole disaster recovery and protection suite now with this partnership with Acronis and scale computing, right? So you can have your primary site that's got snapshots running. So, every hour, every few minutes, there's a snapshot. You can always clone and export that. You can turn up a snapshot without networking. So you can just validate that your snapshots are running well and that your application works, or from a test dev perspective. Like I talked about, you could send that to a second site or a remote location with continuous replication or individual snaps, very low recovery point objectives and targets. You could replicate to Cloud Unity and to Google's cloud if you don't have a physical second location. You can also just take copies and pull those to a NAS or a single HC3 node and use that for rapid restores and rehydration. All of that is protected without agents. There's no additional software you need to install. It can be easily managed within an HC3 and a web page. It's all got integrated file level restore. So from a snapshot, we can drill down and just get Sally Sue's individual Word document back that she overwrote. And all of that, you establish policies, protection policies that virtual machines fall into, and they do those snapshots. And those can be what are called application consistent snapshots, meaning if there's SQL servers running, it's going to tell SQL to pause for a second while you do the backup or the snapshot, and then continue running, clears out the transaction logs, all the things that lead to healthy ongoing IT operations. We had a shared customer testimonial here from Jake Johnson, a shared customer between Scale and Elevity here. And their response was, sure, we were ransomware, but we just ignored the demands, spun up clones of the servers based on the last snapshots prior to being infected. And they went from being offline to operational within an hour or two and never responded to the bad guys at all, right? So we have seen it not just in this case, but time and again, where scale computing and their snapshots have been there for folks. Continuing that business resiliency discussion around Acronis, right? Acronis is maybe somebody you remember as a backup vendor from Acronis TrueImage, right? It was I remember it as the CD that came with a new solid state drive when you did in-place solid state hard drive. upgrades, right? I can tell you as a, that ESC that I lead, as we watched the backup vendors over the last few years, we kind of saw Veeam come out of nowhere and really get focused on virtual backup, but then they got pressured to join enterprise and their product got really big and really complex. They never quite made that jump to cloud in the same way. And we saw other people kind of spin up and get good at replication, right? Zerto got really good at replication, but didn't do backup. And so Acronis really said, hey, we know how to take snapshots of things, right? What we need to do is build integrations to all these modern cloud partners and platforms, and that's what they did. And so Acronis Cyber Protect and their Cyber Cloud product is all web-based, run from the cloud. They've got a full suite that includes ransomware protection, archival backup to on-site NAS, or to reuse the NAS or SAN maybe you already have. But it doesn't need to scan every block again, so it can recover and it can do backups much smaller. And you can recover from a physical server to scale HC3. You can recover a Hyper-V virtual machine over to scale HC3 or up to the cloud or to a physical server. Acronis has built hooks to every major platform: VMware, physical servers, HC3, from scale computing, all the major players, Hyper-V. And so you can come from one thing and restore to something unlike. And still that granular recovery, that ability to even quicker and better navigate and search across emails or files and other objects as you need. So better together is the story that Acronis and Scale came together here very recently and created the BRS node, the Business Resiliency System. So it's a scale computing node leveraging Acronis's software. And means that if today you think, maybe you're sitting there going, boy, I'm not sure our backup in DR is quite in the perfect place, but my primary data center servers are not that old. What do I do? Well, one of the answers may be, let's have scale computing in Acronis and Elevity be your disaster recovery as a service. We'll put in the hardware, that'll be scale hardware. But you can still run your VMware, your Hyper-V, your physical servers as production. We're just going to be the disaster recovery option for you, leveraging these tools and their partnership together. And then when your environment is ready for a complete refresh, then we can start to bring in hyperconverged on scale computing. So they built this, production system. We can send those backups to Acronis's cloud as well as or run it on the BRS nodes themselves. And one of the things, Acronis happens to be Elevity's backup partner of choice. We do have some extended support for some other solutions in our mid-market group. But if you meet us today and become a fully managed customer of Elevity, we're going to leverage Acronis's technology because we saw their development and saw their ability to execute on a cloud level DR. And we vetted them out. We put all these vendors through their paces. And I can tell you that Acronis's cloud option actually works. And one of the big things that it does versus a lot of competitors, and this goes to that resiliency story, is a lot of competitors, your data is in the cloud, it is offsite, but ask your current vendor or partner, how would we actually access that data? What if we needed to turn our environment on in the cloud? How would people access it? None of the IP addresses are the same, and we don't have a firewall in your cloud. So how do we get to that data? How would our end users actionably an hour later log in, and do they know how to do it? A lot of time the answer is scary, and the answer is, well, we wouldn't. We would have your data, but we would need to wait to download it all. Or we'd have your data, but we need to issue a new VPN client to every one of your users, and applications that don't run over VPN well wouldn't work. You need to really test out what that all looks like. In Acronis's Cyber Cloud product managed by Elevity, powered through the Scale partnership here, we can restore quickly to your BRS node on premise, if that's available, or wherever the BRS node is. Maybe it's at a second site, maybe it's the primary site, or we can be running on that BRS node a tiny little virtual machine that's constantly keeping the connection to Acronis's cloud running, so that we can one-click fail over to the Acronis's cloud, and the servers will turn on in Acronis's cloud. And using that virtual machine on premise, it will make those virtual machines pretend like they have the same name and the same IP address, so that all your users can continue to work. So they reboot their machines, and now they're connected to the VMs running in Acronis's cloud. And then we repair the event, we fix the water damage, we get power back to your main location that's been out forever. We can now gracefully fail those VMs back so we don't have another outage coming back from the DR scenario, which is another good question to ask your current provider is, so how do we get that data back? If we ran in the cloud for a while, what would happen and what does it look like to get back on premise again? How graceful is that? Do we lose time? Do we lose data? What does that look like? All those problems are solved when you're in the HC3 family, leveraging BRS and Acronis. So again, the nodes here, again, one-click recoveries can instantiate those VMs or get them running, spin up critical VMs on site, fail back to production very easily. We can, grow capacity on the BRS side by adding nodes, just like you can to the primary cluster. These are very affordable nodes. Since they are sitting in a backup state, they're not production. There is some, cost effectiveness there. And there's real flexibility about how this is priced and sold. Again, leveraging Elevity's experience in the managed services space. This could be delivered as a service, or this could be resold. There's lots of options to fitting this into your budget or to making this work. And it's all stuff that we can manage, or we can co-manage together. It's not a locked ecosystem, and the support you're going to get from Elevity and Scale Computing together is just, unmatched. We're all local people in the Midwest, and we're here and responsive. So again, we can provide that total that kind of total production, total backup in DR scenario, whether it's disaster recovery or backup, and we can leverage big public cloud providers along the way as well, if that makes it more cost effective. Moving away from that, legacy work from home model of sending everybody with laptops, which you may not be able to get in the world, and having people do a VPN, right? You can just have people do BYOD and then leverage virtual desktops. Scale has a number of partnerships with major virtual desktop players. Parallels is one of them. Again, managed from web consoles, easy to deploy, reduces that total cost of ownership over maybe a big player like a Citrix that's very expensive, requires 4 to 6 servers just to run a virtual desktop infrastructure, makes it very difficult. And really, it's about accelerated user experience so that they love VDI, that they want to work in it, that the applications are fast, that they're able to redirect printers and be productive, which is ultimately what providing virtual desktops is all about. We are definitely in this phase. We're having a ton of discussions with clients now that have experienced what the pandemic had impact on their business, and now where they are, and VDI being on the table to really optimize their resiliency kind of going forward. I talked about this earlier, that I would share this, that wherever you go, to the big industry folks like Gartner, or you go into the communities like Spiceworks, read the reviews from the people that have deployed this technology. We can put you in touch with any of our Scale customers. We don't have to cherry pick. We don't have to go, all right, which is the one that's happy with their deployment? They're all happy. It's been a fantastic relationship that we have had with Scale over many years, and you can read it online or talk to the individuals. It's not just used by small businesses, though this does scale down and work for organizations that have 20, 30, 40, 50 users. But it also has scaled all the way up, and Scale has a number of really large organizations. Delahaye is one of their largest deployments they talk about all the time. It's trust in the space in between that, right? So schools and colleges and organizations that are in between. So regardless of your organization size, I would say there's probably a fit for Scale Computing, as long as you have a need to run virtual machines or give people access to virtual desktops and want to do that in a cost-effective, self-healing, scale-out private cloud kind of approach. So that's our content for today. I appreciate you joining and hearing a little bit about the successes that Elevity and Scale have had together. Go ahead and hold your camera over this QR code to set up a meeting with our team to take the next step and get entered in to win one of these super cool Ember mugs that keep your coffee nice and warm. But let's have a conversation about where the direction of your organization is technology, and whether Scale is the right fit for a current project you have or a future project, or whether Scale BRS and Acronis might be a way that, even if you haven't taken the step to hyperconverged, that you're ready from a DR and business resiliency standpoint, kind of a new avenue to introduce and get comfortable with the interface of scale computing, with the concept of hyperconverged, without having to make maybe a bigger step in for the primary data center. Have had success in both, and these are solutions that Elevity leverages actively every single day. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a snapshot of that, and we'll pause here for some questions. If you need to reach me or Jared, if you have any follow-up or questions that you'd like to have about the platform or any of those follow-up conversations, here's our contact info: phager@elevityit.com and jpexa@scalecomputing.com. Here to answer your questions. So I'll leave that up for a second and just see if we have any questions in the Q&A from folks. You should see you can pull up the little Q&A icon and throw your questions into the Q&A chat. Other people won't see it. It'll just come right to us within the platform. All right. No questions means we did a great job. Thanks for joining us today and a little bit of your time. We'll send out this content and share the video so that you can share it with your friends and colleagues and introduce them to this great partnership that we have between Elevity and Scale Computing. Thanks for joining us today.